Welcome to Otterbein University. We're thrilled to have you all with us here today for a special panel with three of our most distinguished alums that we're honored to have in the room, 6 feet apart, of course, but in the room with us here at the Point at Otterbein University. Starting on the far end is Andrew Tobias, who is the State House reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. Then, of course, there's Andy Chow, who is with Ohio Public Media in the State House News Bureau. And then Karen Kassler, who is the head of the State House News Bureau for Ohio Public Media. All three Otterbein alums. Karen and I agreed to not mention class years as part of today's experience, but all distinguished alums, and they actually join another Otterbein alum in Megan Wyckoff, who runs the Ohio channel that broadcasts the governor's daily news conferences and all of that. So there's a lot of Otterbein alumni involved in this thing, and we've gotten a lot of interest in this session because people are just curious how this is all going. So I'm just going to start with a relatively simple question. There's a lot going on right now, obviously. Lots going on. What's your day like nowadays? How does it start? How does it end? How chaotic is it?
Well, I'll start. Sure, why not? I have been going into work at the State House since all this started. So we're talking not only about the pandemic and everything that happened from about, the beginning of March all the way to what's been happening lately with the George Floyd protests. And I've been going into the office every day, and starting at the middle of, I guess it was the beginning of March, I've been anchoring live coverage of Governor Mike DeWine's daily update on coronavirus. And that was kind of a historic partnership among Ohio's public radio and television stations and the Ohio Channel, because so many people were interested in what the governor was saying that the Ohio Channel servers got overloaded and crashed. So the idea was to draw traffic to public radio and television, to the Facebook live feed, and allow the Ohio Channel to absorb traffic in its own way. And so I go in for several weeks. There was a daily update at 2 o'clock, which was affectionately nicknamed Wine with DeWine for a little while. Then, Andy has been covering the press conferences, but we're also doing other things. I mean, for instance, today, the Ohio House is meeting. Yesterday, the Ohio Senate met. That's part of our mission, is still to cover the Ohio House, the Ohio Senate, the Supreme Court, all the other activities that are going on. And so coming into work every day and doing a potentially daily briefing, House and Senate session. Quite often I'm doing radio shows or television shows for some of our member stations. And there's a weekly TV show that Andy and I, along with our colleague Joe Ingles and our videographer Dan Connick, produce, called The State of Ohio, which airs on PBS stations around the state. We're doing that as well. So it's a little bit busy, but I'll let Andy take over on what he's doing, because he's doing a lot more of the out of the office reporting.
Yeah, I was going to say I do a lot of what's going on and covering the COVID-19 response, but I work a hybrid of working from home and still going into the office. It used to be for a while there, every day at 2 p.m., Wine with DeWine, we would have a live broadcast of the briefing. We would front it at the beginning and then come in at the end to recap it a little bit. And so it's been really interesting. Just when you think that you've hit a rhythm and a routine, then things change. So that briefing is no longer a daily briefing. And as we're covering COVID-19, the situation around COVID-19 keeps changing. At the beginning, it was really tracking it and seeing what the spread of the virus was going to be. Then it became the social distancing measures, and then the people who were against the social distancing measures. So the day-to-day routine just keeps changing, and now we have the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd protests going on. And amid the virus. So you're covering the virus and the COVID-19 issues, but you're also covering these mass protests and how do those impact each other. So it's been really interesting. And I think from a broadcast standpoint, it's really had to change the definition of what your typical broadcasts look like, where, usually we'll go around with a nice camera getting interviews one-on-one. Now it might be a Zoom interview. And we've said to ourselves, that doesn't matter as long as the substance and the content is good. We don't care as much about if it is shot on a camera or a Zoom or through the phone. And so we've changed our definitions there a little bit.
And then my daily life, it's just like everybody else's, it's really changed through the trajectory of this whole thing. So I when we had the first suspected coronavirus cases in Ohio, it was a couple of Miami University students down in Oxford. And so I drove down there and stepped out of my car and saw kids wearing masks like the second that I stepped out. And it was almost silly at the time, like the image of that. And it's kind of really striking to look back about how I experienced that day and kind of how we kind of experience life now. But, generally speaking, I do work from home. I go into the State House. In fact, I've been going in more frequently recently as they've been increasing the legislative process there again. And I would also go in for the governor's press conferences occasionally, although I'm not the primary reporter on that. But something else that's been interesting is that we have at Cleveland.com a partnership with Spectrum News. It's a cable news network in Ohio, and we had been previously, before all this, going into their office in a studio and recording interviews. And at some point they said, we're limiting the number of people who are allowed in here, so we're now going to do this from home. So I've gotten kind of used to doing a TV interview from my dining room table. I was on MSNBC and I decided I should look smart, so I sat in front of my bookshelf, like that kind of thing. But it wasn't until yesterday that I had the first experience with my cat trying to interrupt this live interview and stuff like that. So, but it's just been, and then of course, I've not been covering the protests, but the demonstrations have been kind of the backdrop for the last week of my workplace, I guess. So it's just been, one of the things that I like about journalism is that it's our job is different every single day, and it just accentuates. That's accentuated now with just the conditions that we're living under. So.
Yeah, thank you. And those Zoom interviews work, but as Karen and I know, they can be a little awkward. Now I get to ask you questions. It's going to be reversed. We all watch the news, and so we're trying to keep up to date with the facts and all of that. We're sort of more curious about the process and some of the stuff going on behind the scenes. And one of the things that I think a lot about is how the last 3 months has been for anyone in a leadership role. That it has been crisis management for 3 months with no end in sight, right? And this wears on people and it stresses people out. And I don't want any of you to name names or like that, but I'm curious, as you're working with state leaders, corporate executives, folks in the State House, are you seeing evidence of just the wear and tear and the cracks starting to come up of just the constant stress they have lived under for 3 months?
I would say no, not yet, not from what I've seen. I think that, well, let's take the DeWine administration, for example. They have started from the very beginning, back in February, when we started asking questions about COVID-19. One of their main mission statements was that they wanted to be fully transparent. So constantly putting information out there, and I think part of it is doing those daily briefings, always being accessible. And I think that's been the key here. The other thing is we're seeing new information come out about the coronavirus every single day. And so it's been about staying on top of that. As far as wear and tear, I haven't seen that, but I think that you definitely see different leadership styles and different approaches to COVID-19, different approaches to the virus, differing between the governor's administration to House leadership to Ohio Senate leadership. And so as journalists, it is sort of hard to navigate. All right, I'm going into this arena where it's going to look like this compared to that arena where it's going to look like that. So it is sort of hard to balance jumping from place to place.
I would say this is it's subtle, but you can tell under stressful situations, every politician or public figure has a persona, and when things are heightened, you sort of see the real personality come through a little bit more. And so there's been times where Governor DeWine is very disciplined. He's been a politician for 40 years, but you've seen real moments of frustration from him. You honestly have seen a lot of empathy from him, and that's something that's not obvious previously, having not covered him a whole lot up close. It's something that you can observe and witness. And then I would say that during the daily press conferences at the Wine with DeWine, they started. There's a lot of pressure when you have tens of thousands of people watching your every move and counting on the information that you're sharing. So there were some instances where they said things that were wrong and they had to correct them after the fact. And that's something that, if you think about having to do those press conferences every single day, day after day, as they're also they're both trying to tell Ohio what they're doing, and they're also actively trying to figure out what they're doing, maybe at the same time. And so that just sort of is going to run awry sometimes. But generally speaking, they've been very composed, and I think that's probably, like I said, goes back to the governor himself, just being experienced in being in the public eye, and this isn't really new to him necessarily.
I would add that there have been the pressure, I think, is tremendous, because as this has evolved over the course of the last couple of months, it started out Wine with DeWine. Hey, this is quarantine. We're all in this together. And it's morphed in some way into, because it's so hard, into almost a little bit of a darker place because we're all tired of this. This is really difficult. And, you've got 1.2 million people, almost 1.3 million people who have filed for unemployment in Ohio. And you've got a lot of people who are really struggling. You're seeing that in the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests. And there's a real element out there of people who are critical of what the state has been doing in its policies to respond to coronavirus. Some of those people are in the state legislature. And that's been really challenging, I think, for the governor as he's trying to continue on kind of making it up as they're going along, because that's pretty much what they've said, is that they're doing this as it happens. And to get pushback from people who you might have expected to be alongside you as fellow Republicans, and they're not. And there's a minority, but a vocal minority of people who are very unhappy with what's going on. They want everything reopened. They want life to go back to normal as it was in February. And there's the scientific community says that's not something we should be doing right now. So I think that there's a pressure that's going back and forth between the governor and some state lawmakers, and the constant protests. I mean, we had the Open Ohio Now protesters who were showing up at the State House, some of them with weapons. Dr. Amy Acton, the head of the Ohio Department of Health, has had protesters at her house quite often, people who are very upset about what's been happening. And so as this thing has gone on, it's really become a very tension-filled experience, certainly a big change from the beginning. And to watch leaders react to that has really been interesting, and to try to decide what we're going to do at Ohio Public Radio and Television State House News Bureau has been really challenging. I remember somebody saying to me at the very beginning, you need to change the way that you're going to work because things are going to be different. And I didn't believe that at the time. And here we are. I should have listened, but I don't think I could have imagined how different things were going to be in March to where they are on June 4th.
In every part of what we do, in every part of the economy, everything is different, and we're all trying to figure it out. It's not just the governor and everybody else making it up as they go. We're all making this up as we go. Speaking of making it up as we go, we have covered the gamut of issues going on right now, from Black Lives Matter protests, the riots, state budgets falling apart. We have an election in 5 months. We have a pandemic. Any one of those stories would dominate the headlines for a month by itself. But they're all at once. And so I'm curious, as journalists, how are decisions made about what makes the cut and what doesn't, and what stories get attention and which don't? And I'm curious also if there are stories you think that haven't gotten the coverage they might deserve, and people don't realize what's really going on because it's sort of a subplot that hasn't gotten good coverage.
I'll start by saying we only have 3 people. We have 3 people and a videographer. So our bandwidth is limited in that respect. And I know myself, Andy, Joe Ingles, our colleague, have been working very long hours. It was interesting through this quarantine, people talking about, 2 o'clock wine with your wine, and you're sitting around in your pajamas all day or whatever. I'm like, I've never worked this hard in my life. It's because there is so much. Like you were just saying, any one of these things is a huge issue on its own. And so we have to try to figure out, okay, today what's happening that we can focus on and try to catch up to other things as we can. But it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's so much news coming at us all at once, and just trying to sort through it. Fortunately, Andy and I have the State House as a beat, so we can kind of define what we're doing there. But just that is a tremendous amount of news. So I'll let you add on to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, because State House News is our beat, a lot of things in state government came to a screeching halt for a while there, where it was just solely COVID-19, which taking that issue and you dive into it, there's dozens of stories just coming out of coronavirus alone. Now that things are coming back, you are seeing, okay, we got to talk about COVID-19, talk about the protests, but then we just had a conversation earlier today with our radio stations about a bill that we've been following for a while now that has passed, and it's like, oh, are we going to devote resources to that bill, or can another reporter pick that up? So it has been interesting as more things come online. How are we going to tackle this huge issue that impacts all 11 million Ohioans compared to this issue that still impacts a lot of people, but maybe not all 11 million Ohioans? So that's been interesting. I remember, you know, John, what, like you said, a very specific example of this was during the primary, where, you know, we're already just sprinting in this attempt to cover the coronavirus, and now we have the primary going on. And if people don't remember, the day before the primary, it was proposed to be canceled, but then a judge said, no, you're going to keep going, and then it had to go back and forth. And that night was just insane, where you're already going full steam ahead with coronavirus coverage, and then you have this other issue, and it was a lot to handle. But and then we just realized that this is just going to be what it is for a while.
Yeah, on election night, you know, and it's hard to, this is sort of convoluted, but they were saying that there's a court case that the state kind of backed to try to cancel the election from, they had a couple of citizens do it, and the judge ended up blocking that. And I was in the courtroom watching news breaking on social media because I think CNN reported that the election had been canceled, and I was actively tweeting, no, I'm in the courtroom, the judge is right now reading his decision, and he hasn't actually said what it's going to be yet. So I could see like and even the state officials told elections officials the wrong thing, and I think they may have been reacting to some of that media coverage. And so I had people in government yelling at me, telling me that I was wrong, and that ended up not being resolved until like 3 or 4 a.m. that night. So that does speak to, and that was before all this other stuff that we're currently dealing with, you know, and it's just been, like you said, I've never worked harder before. And as far as the stories that aren't being told, I think that with the social distancing, you know, we have to think about being responsible and also protecting our safety for ourselves and our loved ones. And so not only are we dealing with like the velocity of these stories where a protest happens and you're going to hear, you know, the conflicts, that's sort of the nature of media where that's the thing that attracts attention. You can't get up and close and personal and talk to people and see what's really happening here. And so there's been some of that personal touch, I think, that gets lost amidst all of this stuff. And then also because of the speed, it's hard to sometimes take a step back and really examine how these things are affecting people. There's personally, there's been hundreds of millions of education K through 12 funding cuts that the states announced. I've been working for a few weeks to try to manipulate the data. That sounds like work with the data into a way that makes sense and to say this is what's happening in your school district. I mean, and it's been, I'm hoping to finish it today, you know, like, so it's just always, there's just always more stories there, and it's difficult to keep up, and, you know, we just do our best basically, but it is, you know, it's just, there are things that, you just can't do everything, and that's sort of part of life, I guess. But.
And I want to add to that, one of the things that has really happened here, I think, at least for Andy and me, is to rely on partners, people who we work with, other radio and television stations, to try to push some work to them, and to develop those partnerships among the members of the media has been really important, especially since there are so many fewer members of the media now. I mean, at a time when we really need more journalists out in the streets talking to people, covering state government, covering local government, there are fewer of us to do it. And so it really, that's another added challenge with all the other stories that are out there. And so we've tried to work with some partners here to come up with stories that we're missing so they don't get completely lost. Because what you said was really important, that there are stories that are not being told that deserve to be told. There just is nobody available to tell them, and that's really difficult, and it's something journalists really hate to think about.
Yeah, there's a lot of collaborating, and there's a lot of turning to another reporter and saying, did they just say this? Because I want to make sure that I'm 100% in reporting this, and it goes back and forth because we're in a time where anything you report, anything you tweet can really trigger a response one way or the other, so you want to make sure it's completely right. And I wanted to add something to what Andrew said about, you know, making sure that we are personally keeping our distance. I think the thing that I miss the most are what are called gaggles, where, you know, a leader steps down from a meeting or something, and then reporters sort of swarm around that person and ask questions and then ask follow-up questions. And you really get a good dialogue going and really getting down to the nitty-gritty and getting down to the information you need. And I feel like that's sort of missing a little bit, especially as helpful as the DeWine briefings have been. You can't really do a follow-up and a follow-up on the follow-up to really drill down into an answer. And so that's something that I've been missing a lot lately.
Yeah, and it's good to hear that there's a collaborative spirit among the press corps, because it is a time where we have lots of friends at the Columbus Dispatch, and they're doing furloughs and layoffs, and it's a hard time for all sorts of industries, including journalism. Along those lines, I'm curious, how do you think journalism a year or two from now we're through all this, we've all been vaccinated or are immunized, and we get back to whatever normal is going to be after this. Does journalism go back to what we knew before this, or has journalism permanently shifted somehow?
So something that's struck me from the beginning of this is that I'm used to state government and politics almost being like a niche issue where there are people who follow it, who need to know about it, or they're interested in it. And I kind of compare it to sports fans who follow a particular team or something like that. And obviously it's more important than that. But what I've experienced through this whole thing is how critical and vital the information that we're reporting is to people in their day-to-day lives. You know, the governor back at the beginning of this went on CNN or one of the national networks on a Sunday morning, and they asked, "Are you thinking about closing bars and restaurants?" And he's like, "Yeah, we're thinking about it." And then I wrote, "The governor says he's thinking about it," and I just got this huge explosion of people calling me, and you know, we can track on our website our readership, tens of thousands of people instantly we're seeing it, and that's not only is that you know, our lifestyle where we like to be able to go out to eat and drink and that kind of stuff, but there are people whose livelihoods are in the line, and for all of these decisions, it's a combination of both of those things. You know, the unemployment system has been very overburdened with this, and people have been on, and it's improved, but we're unable to get financial support they needed to live, basically, and to buy the things that they needed and support their families. And so we would hear from people, and it'd be heartbreaking, where it would be a very specific situation. It says, "I don't know how I'm going to buy food this week or medicine or something like that." So there's a sense of vitality that the work that we do that it affects people in that way. And I just don't see that being the case in 2 years. I think life will shift. I hope that people will see an increased they'll have an increased appreciation for the value of local news and the job that the media does, an appreciation for that. But you know, like I said, I think that there is a tendency that people want to snap back into their daily lives and live life as normal. So I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, just things have changed so much from a few months ago that couldn't possibly predicted. So this is hard to predict, but that's kind of my thoughts about that, I guess.
So much attention in normal times is paid to the White House and what the federal government is doing and what Congress is doing. And as important as that is, I've been telling people for years now that the state government is making way more decisions that can impact you personally in your house, in your community, and you should pay more attention to it. And that's been something that I've been trying to convince people of. And I think, as Andrew just kind of highlighted there, is that I think people are paying close attention to that. Now, yes, this is something, the virus and the decisions made around the virus are things that are impacting everybody, so they're paying closer attention. Will they still pay attention when the Ohio House is passing SB3, which does this or that or the other thing? That, you know, remains to be seen. But I think another observation I've kind of made over the course of these past couple of months is that reporters, the really good reporters, are getting more attention, I think. And reporters who maybe slip up or maybe have a tendency to sensationalize things have been called out on it more. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is accuracy has been rewarded lately. And I think that's been carrying on. And I hope that is something that continues, is that, like we were saying earlier, the collaboration and really making sure that what we say is 100% accurate, and hopefully that carries forward.
One thing I'm worried about, and you kind of hinted at it with 2 years from now when everybody's been vaccinated and everything, I'm worried about that because, first of all, it's going to be a long 2 or 3 years. It could be another decade before we're back financially to where we were before, and that's really going to hurt journalism. It's already hurt many operations, and I'm really worried about the lack of good journalism as positions have to be cut and as people are still turning to the news for information. There are these citizen journalists who are trying to fill the void a little bit. And so when you talk about people being vaccinated, there's a whole movement of people who say they don't want to be vaccinated. They're concerned. There's this whole conspiracy theory element out there that some people who call themselves journalists are seizing on because there is some distrust for members of the media. And it's really, really concerning. I really hope journalism gets back to a point where people can trust what we do. We're transparent about what we do. We tell you what we see, what we know. We present the data that we find. We link back to the original sources. We do all those things. And I really hope that people trust us and continue to trust us and not turn to sources that are not journalists. They're opinion writers, they're people who have agendas, they're people who are trying to fill that void with information that is semi-factual or may have a loose base in facts. We deal in facts, and I'm really hoping that journalism survives among people who really are searching for truth and facts and don't believe the hype that we're in some sort of cabal where we're reporting things a specific way or whatever. We're reporting things as we see it, as the data tells us, as people talk to us. We're putting it in context, we're analyzing it, and we're doing it from an unbiased perspective. We're trying to show people what's happening.
Well said, and well, maybe too many journalists link back to Otterbein clearly, and so there might be a cabal there in itself. So I'm asking you to predict the future in totally unfair ways. I'm going to do it in one other way because I can't resist. We have 3 political reporters here. We are 5 months from an election. It is not a statewide election year for Ohio, but we will have congressional seats and state house seats and a presidential election. And normally, 5 months out from an election, there'd be a lot of coverage and a lot of talk, and this would be, most of your jobs would be all the sort of ins and outs of what's going on. And we're not hearing any of that because of all the other things going on. And so it is hard to tell what's going to happen come November. So I'm curious, what should we be watching for now that's going to impact those November elections? What are the things that are really going to drive voters, in your opinion, that are really going to drive these campaigns? Because it seems like it's going to be a very short campaign season.
I mean, I think that, like, more than ever, this is true of every election, it can be very driven by external events. We have, there is a lot of data that told us a couple of years ago that Ohio was maybe not going to be as competitive as it used to be, and there are a lot of reasons for that. And polling lately has shown basically a tie race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And so in order for us to have predicted what's happening today, we would have to know that the economy would collapse and that there'd be a global pandemic and widespread civil unrest and everything else that's happened between now and then. And so I think a lot of that is going to continue to be driven between what happens between now and November. And so that's not very exciting to say we don't know what's going to happen. So as far as like things to follow, is just the events, and how people react to them. I think that these sorts of social movements that we're seeing right now, people sort of debate what the actual effect of them is. I think it can really shape the issues that people think about. If you saw with the Occupy Wall Street protests, that the sort of the legacy of that is I think people talk more about issues of economic equality, and you can pick whatever the issue is. So in this case, you could see the way that this proceeds will shape just the framing of how people think about what's important. And so that's just something to watch. It's just how that public conversation plays out.
Yeah, the question always comes down to, this issue polls really well with people and that issue polls really well with people, but are these issues that will cause somebody to vote for a candidate that reflects those issues? And in the end, I'll take Andrew's stance too, is just too close to call, and it's hard to predict. But I think what's happening here, it seems like it will likely continue into November, and I think it'll be interesting to see as the campaigns move on, especially the presidential campaigns, to see how much they think speaking into those issues will impact the election, or will it be the normal things that we usually hear during a campaign? And I think just the overall strategy of campaigns are going to be very different, these virtual tours, and what will the debates look like, and what will the conventions look like. And I think that's going to probably play a role in how they try to connect with voters.
I think the economy is going to be the number one issue, no question. If you've got 40 million people who are unemployed, that's a big deal. And that's the kind of thing that brings people out to vote, because they'll be frustrated, angry, concerned. The economy is always a huge issue, never more so potentially than this year. Some specifics, we have 16 members of Congress who are all on the ballot this year. Neither of our 2 U.S. senators are. We have the entire Ohio House, all 99 members, and half of the Ohio Senate. So this is a big year beyond just the presidential race. But what I will also say, that for quite a while, there was very little money being put into Ohio by the Democratic National Committee. There was a thought that Ohio was not going to be in play. Recent polling has shown Ohio is in play. And there's a lot of evidence that suggests that if Ohio goes to the Democrats, because Donald Trump won Ohio by 8 points in 2016, if Ohio goes blue, it'll be a landslide nationally for Joe Biden. So that is something to keep an eye on. Where is Ohio? Because if Ohio is in play, that potentially makes the race even more competitive. I'd also say one of the things that has me very concerned is what's going to happen with the U.S. Postal Service. Because if we get to a point where we are in a second wave of this pandemic and we have to consider mail-in voting, which is what happened in our primary that was delayed from March 17th to April 28th, if people don't have access to those ballots, that's going to be a big deal. And there's also the potential that the results of the vote could be questioned because people didn't get their ballots, they didn't mail them on time, the Postal Service was unreliable in some way. I'm very concerned about what happens with the U.S. Postal Service since they say they're going to run out of money in September. And so I think that that's something that I'm watching out for personally because it does have an impact if we have to go to a point where people can't go to their polling place and vote in November.
It's going to be a lot to watch, there's no doubt, and unprecedented, there's no other word for it. No one can predict this election because we've never done a mail-in ballot. We've never had a situation where you couldn't do rallies and things like this, and so we're all going to see what happens. I'm curious about a lot of these news stories. You mentioned before, Karen, how we report the facts. That's what we do. Or maybe, Andy, you said that. Somebody said that. And I think that's the true mark of journalism, and you all are making the Otterbein journalism program proud by doing that. That's wonderful. But all of these stories have huge emotional components to them, right? There's the facts of the pandemic, but then there's the emotional reaction of my life is in danger or someone's taking away my freedom. There's the facts of the George Floyd death, but then there's the very understandable emotional reaction to what happened there and what's happening in our streets today. As journalists trying to maintain objectivity, how can you capture the emotional element that's embedded in all of these stories right now?
I mean, that's just a huge challenge. I think that I try to be empathetic. I try to imagine what people are thinking and experiencing and have that inform my coverage. And that doesn't, like I was saying earlier, for example, these protests, it's really easy to focus on their windows broken and their things on fire. And it's harder to explore the question of why do people feel this way. In the past, we've seen social unrest. And if you look back there was a lot of, in the late 60s in Cleveland, there was a pretty prominent African-American neighborhood where there was rioting and protesting and things. And the coverage at the time was really bad at sort of examining the underlying causes. And so so I think that having an open mind and an empathetic approach can help you do better at that. But it still is important to facts has to be the anchor of what journalism is, and being accurate and when I think about what I do, I try to show and not tell often. And so you can have that, you have to have a heart when you're doing that. But at the same time, I think using facts as kind of like a North Star is it's very important in journalism. And I think I'm repeating myself now, but I can't overstate it.
Yeah, I agree with everything Andrew said. I'll also say, let's talk about the protests. Especially if you're kind of just starting at the beginning of this and you're trying to learn what are the pitfalls, what are the things you want to avoid, and what are the things you really want to highlight. It's a challenge, and it's important to read a lot. It's important to be listening to people, to hear what the critique can be. So, for example, with these protests, are you using the word protests or are you using the word rioters? And are you very clearly talking about people who were there to demonstrate a certain issue and separating that from, and picking your words carefully, separating that from the few who decided to split off from that group to break windows or to loot or something like that? And it's important as reporters to be able to, as accurately as possible, tell people what's going on and not just paint everybody as rioters or everybody as protesters. There's a false equivalency that people have been trying to put out there to make sure that you're not, if there are thousands of people protesting for one thing, and then there are 5 people here saying something completely different. Do you have to give those 5 people equal amount of time? Do you have to give them any time? I would say probably a little bit of time, mentioning them a little bit, but there's a huge balance there, and it's a challenge. And I think the thing I would say is that journalists just try to do the best they can. When I was at this protest on Sunday, I recognized that there was just so much stuff going on, and I was really worried that my 45-second radio spot wasn't going to be able to tell the whole story. And we're lucky enough to have a TV show where I was able to really lay everything out and say, this is everything that I saw, and then recognizing that I'm sure there are things that I didn't see. One quick story was I saw a big group of people go past the State House troopers and shake their hand and say, hey, we're here to protest. We are protesting the death of George Floyd, but we also want to say that we know you're here doing a job. And I record it, and somebody behind me says, why isn't the press here recording this? Like, I am here. And that's always the knock on reporters. They think that they're not there. They think that they're not telling the story. And we're doing the best we can to tell that story.
Yeah, I had a guy on Twitter. I got a couple Twitter trolls, as you can imagine. And one guy was saying, why aren't you reporting the good stuff? And I came back at him with at least 10 examples of times that we have reported the good stuff just in the last couple of days. So we are trying to capture everything that we're seeing. And Andy makes a really good point about how I'm only one person, he's only one person, Andrew's only one person. We're trying to do what we can with those individuals, but also in our collaborations with other reporters, talking to other reporters, what did you see, what's going on, where's this happening? That's very helpful. But one thing that Andrew said that I want to come back to too is the whole idea of facts. And I understand that people get very frustrated and are angry, and it's a very difficult time for all of us. Everybody's got their own coronavirus crisis story. But there are some people who are out there saying things that are just simply not true. The whole idea of you've lost your freedom. That's not true. We have been asked to stay at home, and some businesses were ordered closed to slow the spread of coronavirus. It wasn't, it's not a permanent removal of people's civil rights. And so we've struggled with this a little bit. How do you cover those voices when what they're saying is not grounded in fact, and they're spreading a narrative that is potentially dangerous? Because if this disease does spread, like scientists have told us it can, and we have over 2,000 people in Ohio who are dead from coronavirus and COVID-19 just since mid-March, many of those people are in nursing homes, this disease is deadly. And it's our responsibility as journalists to stick with the facts and make sure that we aren't allowing people to promote a false narrative that could potentially hurt others. And it's been a real challenge to make sure that we are staying with the facts, but also giving people a voice. There's a struggle here. And as political reporters especially, because now it's become a political issue. It's a political issue now to wear a mask, and the science has evolved on that. You have people trying to say, well, masks weren't a good idea 2 months ago. Why are we wearing a mask now? Because the science has changed around this disease. And so it's really challenging.
I'm curious about the line between our professional roles and our personal lives. Is something that I think I struggle with that. I think we all worry about that sometimes. And this is such a 24/7 news cycle. And I see things like, Andy, you and I were joking before about your tweets of your cute kids and your beautiful family, and you're inviting your listeners and your viewers into your personal life in some respect. And I'm curious about how you think about that line and when and how to cross it, and what the benefits and cons are to doing that.
Well, I've seen personally a big evolution when it comes to that. Before this, I used to have a very thick wall between my professional life and my personal life. Before March, if you looked at my Twitter, I never tweeted about my family. But you're right, John, this is just, everything is just so intermixed. And so it just kind of feels like it's not just something that we're covering from 9 to 5 on the weekdays. This is something that's happening every single day, evening, morning. And I think just, when I started tweeting out videos, it was kind of like telling a story of what life looks like with COVID-19. My wife is a teacher, so she's at home but still teaching kids.
Also an Otterbein alumna?
Also an Otterbein alum.
Naturally.
Naturally.
Vanessa Wilson, class of '08, education. And so, you know, we're all trying to balance that. And I thought it was I thought it was kind of just a nice thing to say, you know what, I really appreciate that all of you out there are trusting the information that we're providing. Here's a glimpse of what I'm also going through during this coronavirus. Now, recently, because of the protests and because there are other things out there, I've decided to kind of go silent on those things because there are other issues out there. And so just for me personally, I thought there's no need to be tweeting about my kids when people are demonstrating for other things. So it is trying to find that balance. I think that, you know, again, going back to the idea of asking people to trust you with the information, I think it kind of might help a little bit to say, here's a little snippet of my life. And so that's been kind of an interesting evolution that I've seen over the past couple of months.
Yeah, I think, you know, I too am pretty cautious about just saying anything really about my personal life or my family per se, but at the same time, you know, there was a point of view that emerged when this was first happening and people were losing their jobs that we in journalism were somehow rooting for that to happen, and people that's woven into a conspiracy theory about that we're partisan operatives and we have a political agenda we're trying to achieve. But the fact is that my friends and family were losing their jobs, were at risk of losing their jobs, you know, maybe in danger, being medically vulnerable and that kind of thing. And so it can be helpful for us to kind of remind people that we're not just like a head that appears on TV or something like that, that we're real people. You know, I've lived in Ohio my entire life. I'm very invested in what happens in this state, and it affects me personally and everybody that I know. So, so that is something that there's journalistic value, I think, in kind of pushing back against that a little bit and reminding people that we're not outside of this story. We're in it with everyone else.
I have a Facebook page that's only people I know, people who are my friends, people who are my family, people who I have a connection with. And then I have a professional page. On my personal page, I've had a couple of rants where I've taken some friends to task for talking about the media and how the media doesn't do this and whatever. And I've reminded people that we are your neighbors, your friends, people in your community, people you went to high school and college with. We want the same things everyone else wants. We want the state to do well. We want there to be success. We don't want what's happening now at all. And it's really, really frustrating. On Twitter, I didn't used to tweet a whole lot. I do now because it's really important. And I think that the beat that Andy and I are covering, and Andrew, is tremendously significant when you start talking about unemployment, the economy, budget cuts, things like that. I used to tweet occasionally about my deep and abiding love for the Cleveland Indians, the Columbus Clippers, Ohio State football. I don't anymore because, well, these things aren't happening. But also, I have pushed back a little bit because I have had some trolls, I had some threats, and it makes you think twice about what you want to share about your personal life. And do I want to put a picture of me and my son up somewhere when I had somebody, you know, say something really nasty and threatening to me? So the problem is, you talk about personal life. I'm not sure if I have a personal life right now, even though, you know, there's no sports to watch. And so I just filled all that time with work and consuming social media and trying to understand both the pandemic and what's happening here and internationally, but also with the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd movements, and try to understand some of those perspectives too. So I guess my life is one big mash of everything that's happening all at once, and I guess until school and sports come back for my kid, I don't know if I'm going to have a personal life for a while.
Well, even if you can't share your personal lives online or whatever, we know you're delightful people because you're Otterbein alums. I think we have time for one concluding question. I want to leave folks with a vision, as it were, that I'm curious, in the last 3 months, there have been lots of surreal moments. Like, this is a time in our lives and our careers that I'm going to say I hope we never go through anything like this again. This is one of those life-changing moments, and I'm curious if you can each share a moment that was striking, moving, surreal, that sort of is a memory that you will never lose from the last 3 months. I finally stumped the journalist. This is fantastic.
I mean, I don't know if this is like the essential answer. I mentioned this earlier. I will never forget getting out of my car and seeing the kids in the mask. I think that there was some fear. I think there was a call that went out on campus at Miami University that this was the case. I don't think we knew a lot about what was happening then. I also think it was kind of a joke to some degree. I think these guys were potentially, they were headed towards the press conference that I was there to cover, and they ended up, lo and behold, every reporter saw them and they were on the news, including on our website and maybe even our newspaper. And so, I remember kind of having a little bit of like, oh, here I am covering a pandemic. I went to a party that night. It was I think the Super Bowl was that day. And I mean, I even remember just kind of, Amy Acton has become this really popular, or I guess a better word is like a well-known figure in Ohio. And, I remember when I met her, she was I was at a press conference where they were talking about the dangers of vaping. And that was like the major public health concern at the time. And it was maybe probably 2 months before that or something like that. So, and then another just kind of like anecdote. I mean, I was I just went to the State House yesterday to do my job, and I left, and I did not realize that I was going to be walking into a group of protesters who were essentially blocking the entrance, and I had to tap one of them on the shoulder so I could get out. And when I went into the State House that day, about 20 or 25 Ohio State troopers walked by me with tactical gear and like plastic shields and stuff. And, I drove by military utility vehicles. I had to ask a National Guard member for directions because roads were closed. So, I mean, there's just a lot of the images that's going to be the backdrop of this whole story are things that I'm never going to forget. They're things that I wouldn't have expected that I'd be experiencing. So that's just like, I don't know if that's the best answer, but that came to mind.
Number of really striking images there, no doubt.
I would say I have two on a more lighthearted note. Like you mentioned, the time where the governor out of nowhere just mentioned that he saw a video of me playing with my kids was just kind of really shocking, but it also just kind of sparked a lot of attention. And so I got a lot of Twitter followers that day, and I got a lot more people kind of following what we do. And so that was interesting. And then I think more on a newsier note, but also personal, the day that the governor announced that mask wearing was important was really interesting for me personally. I'm Chinese American, and wearing masks is very normal. It's a very common thing culturally. Every time I go to Taiwan or visit China, people are wearing masks. If they're showing symptoms of anything, they wear masks. And so for the governor of the state of Ohio to come out and say masks are okay, masks are something that we encourage people wearing, because like Andrew said, when you see people wearing masks here, it's unusual. It used to be unusual, and now we're seeing it to be more of the norm. And so for the governor to come out and say that was a really interesting moment for me.
I feel like I've been in the pot that has slowly been going up to boil because I've been watching this through the whole process, and I can remember moments of, when the Arnold Fitness Classic was canceled. That was a big moment. But then as things just kept moving, the press conferences moved. The press conferences started in a press conference room where the governor was standing there and reporters were there in the room, and then it moved to a bigger room so everybody could spread out a little bit more. And then it moved to where reporters were in a totally different section and the governor was in a different room. And then the reporters had to be moved downstairs because of the concern about protesters outside. And it just through the whole process, and meanwhile, businesses are closing, downtown is deserted. It was so weird, but I'm thinking of some specific moments. That one protest where Joshua Bickle from the Columbus Dispatch took a photo that went viral that it's kind of been called like the zombie protest photo. I was standing right next to him and took a photo, but mine was nowhere near as good because he is a professional photographer and I am not. But that was a real moment for reporters to be in the State House atrium trying to ask the governor about things and being surrounded on all sides of this room that's full of windows by people who were screaming and pounding on the windows and angrily protesting. It was a really searing moment there. Driving into downtown now is really pretty amazing because it looks like what you would, I guess, assume would be a war zone. Lots of plywood, some of it preventative, I guess, some of it to cover windows that have been broken. The night that the State House did suffer damage from the first night of protests, I'll never forget watching that because I've been around for a while and I've seen a lot of protests at the State House. And never, I mean, there were thousands of people in 2011 protesting the union, the collective bargaining reform bill, and thousands of people. I thought that was a big deal. This is an even bigger deal, and it's continuing on and on and on. It's hard to pick any one moment, but it's really been a journey that has had several flashpoints that I know when I look back at my old pictures, like of when I went to a Blue Jackets game in February, it really feels like we are in a different world. Things have changed, and maybe permanently. And so it's almost hard to look back at those old pictures because that's not our reality right now. Will it ever be again? And that's a question I can't answer.
Well, that's a perfect place to end, and I want to thank Karen Kassler, Andy Chow, and Andrew Tobias, not just for your time today. I mean, there's a lot going on, and you took the time to come to Westerville and join us in the Point through a rainstorm and the whole thing, and we appreciate you doing that. But more than that, we appreciate the work that you do every single day. We are, all of us as citizens, more reliant on the news now than any other time, and having people like you out there doing that work is very meaningful and impactful in all of our lives. So thank you for what you do, and thank you everyone for joining us.